I want to welcome everybody to the fourth annual Paul Longmore Lecture on Disability Studies. And I want to welcome our speaker, Mia Mingus, who the second time is a charm. This is great. And, you know, because we had to cancel, I know a lot of you realized that we had to postpone the earlier one, but now we're here, and the wait is going to be worth it, I'm sure. And so I want to welcome everybody, and I'm delighted that you're here. I'm Kathy Kudlick, and I'm director of the Paul Longmore Institute on Disability at San Francisco State here on campus. And I'm honored and really moved to have people here, because I know right now, especially, we have a lot of choices about where to put and a lot of demands on our time about where we're going to put our energies. And so this is a wonderful a decision that a lot of you have made, and I really appreciate that. And I also think it's important to know that it's really worth it, because even though the current political situation is taxing all of us, it's important to have spaces where we feel like we can come together with people that have similar goals about bonding with other people and learning something new and advancing social justice and disability rights. So we also know that it's essential to be among kindred spirits, and that's what we try to do at all of our events here at the Longmore Institute. And I'd like to sort of share a little bit about what the Longmore Institute is. There's some literature on your way in. But for those of you not familiar with us, I just wanted to point out that we were named for the larger-than-life disability activist scholar Paul K. Longmore. How many people remember and know and honor Paul? Just shout it out. Yay, Paul, you know. We're here to honor him, too. And really, he taught for 2 decades at San Francisco State before he died unexpectedly, and he was beloved by everybody, by students, by even by administrators, and by just everybody, janitors, everybody. He was a force of nature. He had polio, and he really galvanized people to think about disability in innovative ways. And so he was, as I said, he was very beloved, and they decided to honor him by naming the Longmore Institute for him. And they recruited nationally for a director, and they put some resources behind getting the Institute up and going. And we feel it's our responsibility to really do some cool stuff to honor his memory. And you're all here today to benefit from that. All that we do comes from a core belief that the world is better because of disabled people. And we really work to create bridges between academics and between social justice people and community people, and so that we can have conversations and learn and nourish one another. And that's what we're going to do today. Disability is always at the core of everything that we do, and we try to create these spaces where people with disabilities and without, allies and people that are curious. I just learned a new term, disability curious. I thought that was pretty interesting. But anyway, disabled people and our allies can come together really and learn and experience and grow together. And so check us out on social media, follow us on Facebook, Twitter, etc. And we have little cards that tell you how to do that. And sign up for our mailing list. We don't bombard you. We're really eager just to kind of keep you abreast of what we're doing, to tell you about our upcoming project. I wanted to let people know that this talk is going to be recorded, so that if you heard a part that you wanted to listen to again or you wanted to share it, it will be available, and we'll send out information about how that will happen when it's ready. I have some thanks to offer here. I want to give a special shout out to the College of Liberal and Creative Arts here on campus, and also the Disability Programs and Resource Center, the DPRC, who provided captioning services. And I want to thank our dedicated captioner over there. They make this all possible, and this is great for us. I also want to thank our student workers and volunteers who are scattered throughout the room. Do you guys want to just identify yourselves, just sort of make some noise or whatever? Yay! And as always, my biggest thanks go to my Associate Director, Emily Smith-Badix. she's pulled the right strings in the right ways at the right times, just to make sure that all of this came together so flawlessly. And she has a PhD in her own right. Some of you might not know that. She has a PhD in American Studies from University of Minnesota and a concentration on disability studies. And she was the one that came up with the idea of inviting Mia Mingus. So I'd like to invite her up to introduce our speaker today. So thank you and welcome.
Thank you so much. The invitation, it did come from my idea, but it was following a conversation that we had with our students. One of the most exciting programs and activities that we do at the Longmore Institute is hire and work with students with disabilities and students who are non-disabled but have an interest in thinking through the politics of being an ally and are interested in doing disability work. We actually have paid opportunities coming up this summer. If you're interested, please grab me and talk to me later. And one of the exciting things is watching professional development grow, watching their knowledge of disability studies grow. And when we played, we had one meeting where we always would read something or just find something new to talk about. When we watched Mia Mingus's conversation at an event like this that you can watch on YouTube, just talking specifically about disability justice, I just watched everybody's energy and excitement about what they were doing and why disability work matters to sort of elevate to the next level. So Mia seemed like a perfect person to fit with the scholar-activist conversations that we like to highlight here at the Longmore Institute. And I'm very grateful to her that she was available to come. I'll read her bio. Mia Mingus is a writer, public speaker, community educator, and organizer working for disability justice and transformative justice responses to child sexual abuse. She's a queer, physically disabled Korean woman, transracial and transnational adoptee, born in Korea, raised in the Caribbean, nurtured in the U.S. South, and now living in Northern California. She works for community, interdependency, and home for all of us, not just some of us, and longs for a world where disabled children can live free of violence with dignity and love. As her work for liberation evolves and deepens, her roots remain firmly planted in ending sexual violence. And she's currently working with the Living Bridges Project as of 2016, and I'll invite a conversation of that in the Q&A. I'm sure people will want to hear more about what you're doing today if you don't cover that in your talk. So with that, I welcome Mia. Thank you.
Hi, how are you? I gotta grab my pen out. I just realized that I didn't have my pen out. Thanks you all for coming out and for having me and for organizing this twice for me. I don't have pneumonia anymore, so we're good. Yeah, exactly. Applause. Thank you for having me to your beautiful campus. It was a lovely drive over here. Oakland seems so close, yet so far away. Okay, so I want to get started because I know we're going to have a Q&A after this so folks can ask questions. Hi. I'm like finally getting to see everybody. I have a lot to say tonight, so I also wanted to thank you all for inviting me because it gave me a chance to do some reflection on access intimacy and what it's meant in my life and how it connects to disability justice, so thank you. So I want to just start and say, first and foremost, thank you for having me. I want to send a lot of thanks to Emily, who did so much work on this twice, 2 events to make this happen, and who was so flexible and understanding and kind and just supportive when I, last minute told her, hey, I have the flu and pneumonia at the same time. There's no way I'm going to be able to make it. Though I was trying. The internalized ableism is hard to kick. I was trying to get here. But really, thank you so much. And, honestly, I think a lot of it would have been very different if had it not been a disability event. And I really value and cherish disability community because of that kind of understanding and flexibility that we have around access, around, injury that might happen, different things, and that comes from our own lived experiences and our own lives of having to make shifts, make things work out, at the last minute, try to piece together some form of access that doesn't necessarily cover all of your access, but you're trying to make it work. So just thank you so much, and I also learned, as I've been here for the last hour, that this university does really great work around accessibility, and it seems like it's heads above the rest of a lot of the country. And I travel all over the place, and many colleges and universities are still even struggling with basic access, of just basic what would it mean to have a student in a wheelchair be on our campus, basic things. So I really appreciate the work that's happening here. So I want to say thank you to the people who made this event possible twice, as well as making the event accessible. It's sadly very rare in social justice work, and that's something that I'm seeing changing, and that I hope we can continue to change, because we have come a long way, but we have a very, very, very long way to go. So while I'm excited for the changes that have happened, and I was so excited the first time I saw Angela Davis say disability and with everything else and say ableism, I was I almost fell out of my chair. It was very exciting, but I was buckled into my wheelchair, so I couldn't fall out of it. How's that speed? Yes? Okay. So I want to first off do a little bit of an introduction. I want to send a thank you out to everyone around the globe, or in this country, on this continent, who are resisting the current administration, resisting greed, toxic masculinity, white supremacy, fascism, colonization, the active colonization that we see, not just around the Dakota Access Pipeline, but across the globe as well. Who are resisting environmental destruction, xenophobia, Islamophobia, and rape culture. Just thank you, thank you, thank you. And I'm sure many of you in this room are doing that in big and small ways too, and I really appreciate it. And I want everybody here to know that all of our work is connected, and our work is connected to the folks who are resisting as well. It was really amazing when they pulled that bill off the floor, wasn't it? Yeah, it was pretty amazing. I want to extend gratitude to not only the organizers of this event, but also to the people who work and care for these buildings, rooms, and grounds, the people who built this building, dispose of the trash, and clean the floors and toilets every single day, the people who work for this institution but can't afford to attend it or live near it. They're part of our time here today as well. Let us also acknowledge that we are always on native land, and this is no exception, and that communities and lands around the globe are being exploited so that we may sit here in an air-conditioned room together. Let us remember how interdependent our lives are, not only when it's convenient, but every single day. So before I get into my talk, I want to say a couple of things unequivocally, and it's sad that in 2017 I still have to keep saying this, but it feels necessary. So I want to say unequivocally that disabled people are everywhere. We are one of the largest oppressed groups on the planet. We are part of political movements, even if you don't know or don't acknowledge that we are. No matter what community you are working with disabled people. And given how violent and polluted our world is, those numbers will only continue to grow. Disability and ableism are not secondary issues, though they continually get treated as such. If you are a disabled person out there, I want you to know that our experiences as disabled people matter. Our experiences as disabled queer people of color matter. Even if queer people of color and queer people of color communities don't bother to include us in their events, social gatherings, strategies, movements, analysis, and communities, we matter, and our stories and experiences matter. It means something to be disabled. It means something to be disabled. Understanding disability and ableism is the work of every human being, no matter where you are, every revolutionary, activist, and organizer, every human being on the planet. Disability is one of the most organic and human experiences we can have. We are all aging, and we are all living in polluted and toxic conditions, and the level of violence currently in the world should be enough for all of us to care more about disability and ableism. So I want to focus my remarks tonight on access, intimacy, interdependence, and disability justice. And I want to talk about these because I think that they are, especially access intimacy, They're an important example of how we can reframe our understandings of disability to help us in our fight for liberation. So, for those of you less familiar with access intimacy, it's a term that I began using and then coined in the spring of 2011. And it's I'm going to read from my essay, Access Intimacy, The Missing Link, which you can find on my blog. Oh, by the way, I'm going to post this entire talk on my blog too. So those of you that are racing to take notes, you can give your wrists a break. And I just want to say, I came up with this term. I started using it. It was useful for other disabled people in my life, and they were like, hey, you should write something about that. So I said, okay. But I didn't invent access intimacy. Just because you name something doesn't mean you invented it. I know in Western culture with white supremacy, we think that's what it means. But I didn't invent this. I just gave a name to something that I had been experiencing that ended up being useful. So I hope it's useful to you. So this is a long quote, but I wanted to give enough information for folks who may not know about access intimacy. Quote, I have never had words for access intimacy before. For years, I would feel it or crave it, but not know how to describe it. It has always been just out of reach, just beyond my grasp. I have mistaken it for emotional or political intimacy, sexual attraction, or romantic desire. I have mistakenly assumed that it would be there based on one's identity or experience, which is not true. I have grappled with how to describe the closeness I would feel with people who my disabled body just felt a little bit safer and at ease with. There have been relationships that have carried emotional, physical, and political intimacy, but sorely lacked access intimacy. And there have been relationships where access intimacy has helped to create the conditions out of which emotional, familial, and political intimacy could grow. Access intimacy is that elusive, hard-to-describe feeling when someone else gets your access needs. The kind of eerie comfort that your disabled self feels with someone on a purely access level. Sometimes it can happen with complete strangers, disabled or not, or sometimes it can be built over years. It could also be the way that your body relaxes and opens up with someone when all your access needs are being met. It is not dependent on someone having a political understanding of disability, ableism, or access. Some of the people that I have experienced the deepest access intimacy with, especially able-bodied people, have had no education or exposure to a political understanding of disability. And I continue to find this over and over again. Access intimacy is also the intimacy I feel with many other disabled and sick people who have an automatic understanding of access needs out of our shared, similar, lived experience of the many different ways that ableism manifests in our lives. Together, we share a kind of access intimacy that's ground level, with no need for explanations. Instantly, we can hold the weight, emotions, logistics, isolation, trauma, fear, anxiety, pain of access. I don't have to justify, and we're able to start from a place of steel vulnerability. It doesn't mean that our access looks the same, or that we even know each other's access needs. It has taken the form of long talks into the night upon our first meeting, knowing glances shared across a room or in a group of able-bodied people, or the feeling of instant familiarity to be able to ask someone for help or support. In my life, access intimacy is something that has been hard-won, organic, or at times even felt magical. It has taken me by surprise, showing up with people that I never would have expected to have that kind of access connection with. It has been exciting and relieving, like a long, slow exhale. I don't know where it comes from or how it happens. It has felt like an unspoken, instinctual language between different people, like an entirely different way and unique way of being able to communicate and connect. Similar to meeting someone that you just click with, access intimacy has felt like a distinct form of attraction, desire, and energy onto itself. Access intimacy is not charity, resentfulness enacted. It's not intimidation or humiliating trade for survival. It is not an ego boost. In fact, all of this threatens and kills access intimacy. There is a good feeling after and while you are experiencing access intimacy. It is a freeing, light, loving feeling. It brings the people who are part of it closer. It builds and deepens connection. Sometimes access intimacy doesn't even mean that everything is 100% accessible. Sometimes it looks like both of you trying to create access as hard as you can with no avail in an ableist world. Sometimes it's just someone sitting and holding your hand while you both stare back at an inaccessible world. Unquote. So tonight I want to focus on access intimacy tonight I want to focus on access intimacy between disabled people and able-bodied people specifically because it's been the hardest for me to build in my life. And also because I don't have paid or formal attendance, and so I'm often relying on friends, coworkers, strangers a lot of times for my access, as is the case for so many disabled people. So for me, I understand access intimacy as something that can transform ordinary access into a tool for liberation, instead of merely reinforcing inclusion and equality. I am done with disability simply being included in able-bodied people's agendas and lives only when it's convenient. I want us to tap into the transformative powers of disability instead of only gaining access to the current system, or the burning house, as Grace Lee Boggs would talk about, and doing nothing to change that system. We don't simply want to join the ranks of the privileged. We want to challenge and dismantle those ranks and question why some people are consistently at the bottom. It is not enough just to gain access to our current systems. We have to also work to transform them. We can't just keep resisting against the world we don't want. We have to also work to build the world we do want. Cultivating access intimacy is a way to directly challenge ableism and the relentless isolation that disabled people endure, especially disabled folks who are part of other oppressed communities. Access intimacy at once recognizes and understands the relational and human quality of access, while simultaneously deepening the relationships involved. It moves the work of access out of the realm of only logistics and into the realm of relationships and understanding disabled people as humans, not burdens. Disabled people's liberation cannot be boiled down to logistics. I don't know how many more times I can say this. We are human beings, and there's human parts of access and disability work that we're never going to get to if we only focus on the logistics of getting a ramp or the logistics of getting an ASL interpreter. Those things are important, but there's so much more. To me, access intimacy is interdependence in action. It is an acknowledgement that what is most important is not whether or not things are perfectly accessible or not whether or not there is ableism, because there will always be ableism, but rather, what are the impacts of inaccessibility and ableism on disabled people and our lives? In my experience, when access intimacy is present, the most powerful part is having someone to navigate access and ableism with. It is knowing that someone else is with me in this mess. It is knowing that someone else is willing to be with me in the never-ending and never-changing daily obstacle course that is navigating an inaccessible world. It is knowing that I will not be alone in the stunning silence, avoidance, and denial of ableism by almost every able-bodied person I will meet or will ever meet. Access intimacy is knowing that I will not be alone in the stealth, insidious poison that is ableism. The power, I think, of access intimacy is that it reorients our approach from one where disabled people are expected to squeeze into able-bodied people's world and instead calls upon able-bodied people to inhabit our world. It flips the script. It challenges able-bodied supremacy by valuing disability, not running from disability, but moving towards it. It asserts that there is value in disabled people's lived experiences. So in this way, it reframes both how and where solidarity can be practiced. Access intimacy is shared work by all people involved. So it's no longer the familiar story of disabled people having to do all the work to build the conversations and piece together the relationship and trust that we know we need for access, that we know we need in order to survive. I know that this has been the story of my life, especially with able-bodied people of color and able-bodied queer people of color. Disabled people get told all the time that we must shrink ourselves and our desires to settle for living in the wake of an able-bodied parade. And especially if we are part of other oppressed communities, we are expected to be grateful for whatever crumbs are thrown our way. In my life, this has looked like a lifetime of political events by communities I am a part of that were not and continue to not be accessible, and where seemingly no one even pondered disability, with no mention of it on any type of event information that I see. And by the way, that's the first thing that I look for when I look at an event that I'm interested in going to, is the accessibility, because I know that's the only way I can go, is if I know if it's accessible to me. So if you don't put that on there, then to me it says you're not very interested in whether or not disabled people come. And political events where access was done reluctantly or only for political show with no integrity behind it. It has looked like a lifetime of rich, passionate political conversations with people from my communities about everything under the sun except disability. And if disability was going to be talked about, it was always me who had to bring it up. It has looked like friends from my communities inviting me to social gatherings and never once asking me or thinking about my access or differences in ability. It has looked like dates that were inaccessible and in the worst cases left me badly physically injured and or bloody. It has looked like a lifetime of supporting my communities to do their work and them never showing up for anything related to disability. It has looked like friendships that expect me to do all the work to educate them on disability and engage in conversations about disability and ableism. And I think even as we look around this room, do we see the big players in the San Francisco political movements here? Not to say that people should come and hear me speak, but I'm saying in terms of disability, right? Like how are we thinking, if we talk about intersectionality, but we only want to intersect the things that we feel comfortable with, then that's not necessarily intersectionality. It's easy, so I just want to say, it's easy to list these things off and to analyze them. But it's harder to convey the way that they have felt. It's harder to talk about how incredibly, sometimes unbelievably painful these things have felt when experienced. Queer people of color to be parents want to spend hours talking about how they will support their will-be children to explore their genders and sexualities outside of binaries, which is great. But when I ask them how they will support their child if they are or become disabled, the conversation abruptly stops, or I'm told that I'm being negative. Or Asian, Korean, or Korean adoptee communities don't make their gatherings accessible, and then I'm asked, why aren't you more connected to these communities? Or disabled communities who have no interest in talking about race, sexuality, or gender, and respond with hostility that you're being divisive when you explain that you cannot separate your disability from your other identities. Or the only access people you can find are white, and there are people of color only spaces that you desperately need access to for your own survival as a woman of color adoptee. The ways that ableism and white supremacy work together to so successfully isolate disabled people of color continues to break my heart. This is why access intimacy has been so important to me and my life. It's been an antidote to the pain and the extreme isolation that pound like crashing waves with no end. It has been a way to remember my magnificence and my dignity. It has been the tender balm and recognition of parts of me that most people would rather deny, avoid, and pretend away. And I want to be transparent. Access intimacy is not easy to build. When it doesn't happen magically or organically, it has been hard to create. It requires a lot of trust and practice and faith. It has been lonely, very, very lonely, because not everyone is ready for it. Or not everyone is even a good fit for it. And it has taken discipline inside myself to not settle for crappy access when I don't have to, which often means that I have less access. And because we live in an able-bodied society, most of the burden is still on disabled people and will be for quite some time. To grow access intimacy and to introduce the concept to able-bodied people in our lives. It is like anything else that transforms you, in that it is a thawing that will force you to inevitably question why you have gone so long without it and why it doesn't exist in more places in your life, similar to the way that any kind of powerful alignment or joy or love does. You know, it reminds me of the way that Audre Lorde would talk about the erotic in her essay, The Uses of the Erotic. And she says, quote, "For once we begin to feel deeply all the aspects of our lives, we begin to demand from ourselves and from our life pursuits that they feel in accordance with that joy which we know ourselves to be capable of." Unquote. Access intimacy is one of the main ways that I have been building interdependence in my life. I've been pushing myself to grow it and not just subsist on the little that I've been able to find. Most significantly with my partner, as is the case for many disabled folks. Engaging in building any kind of interdependence will always be a risk for everyone involved, period. And the risk will always be greater for those who are more oppressed and have less access to privilege. In an ableist world where disabled people are understood as disposable, it can be especially hard to build interdependence with people you need in order to survive, but who don't need you in order to survive. In an ableist context, interdependence will always get framed as burden, and disability will always get framed as inferior. To actively work to build something that is thought of as undeniably undesirable, and to try to reframe it to others as liberatory, that is no small task. It is hard work. I'm not standing up here pretending that access intimacy is some social justice jewel floating through the sky. It's hard work. And I think especially as disabled people, we know what it means to live interdependent lives, and it doesn't always feel revolutionary or enjoyable. And let's just be real about that. There will always be a difference of power between myself and able-bodied people I am in relationship with. It will always be a choice for them not to have to engage in any work around disability or ableism. It will always be perfectly acceptable for them to never have to have conversations about disability or ableism, and certainly never to have any conversations that address their privilege, ignorance, or question their ableist desires. They will never be expected to be in solidarity with disabled people, and even if they are, even if it's mildly or offensively, they will be applauded by the world for taking pity on us. The scales are already tipped, and those of us who are on the sinking side know all too well what living in the shadows is like. In my life, access intimacy continues to be a game changer, a way to queer access into a tool that we can use to get free. It has been a way to shift and queer how I and others understand disability and ableism. And because of the inherent interdependence of access intimacy, the we of access intimacy, it has transformed the kind of conversations that I'm able to have with some of the able-bodied people in my life. Access intimacy has helped me to orient my desires from a place of magnificence and move towards the ugly. It has required me to demand more from the people in my communities and settle less because I know that things can be better. And that's huge for me as a disabled person. In short, it has sparked possibility inside of me that growing up as a disabled child, I never had and I never knew could exist. As a disabled child, I didn't know that access could be anything other than the usual mix of guilt, shame, and isolation that always seems so normal. Access intimacy is critical to disability justice because there will never be any work with disabled people that does not include accessibility work. And it's important to note that access is often one of the biggest hurdles to doing work with disabled communities. access is not some optional way of life for us. It's part of everything we do. It's part of everything I do. It's part of my self-care, my collective care. It's part of my daily life in the day and the night. So if we're working to transform the world for all of us and not just some of us, access will be a huge part of this work. There is no liberation without disabled people. Period. There is no liberation without disabled people. So I want to talk a little bit about this thing I've been calling liberatory access. I don't know if it's the best name, but I'm working it out. So we talk about the importance of making our movements and communities accessible. And yes, that is completely important. We have to make our work and our spaces more accessible. There is no way around it. Access is concrete resistance to the immense isolation that disabled people face every day. But I don't want us to just make things accessible. I want us to build a political container in which that access can take place in and be grounded in. Access for the sake of access is not necessarily liberatory, but access for the sake of things like justice, community, love, liberation is liberatory. We can use access as a tool to transform the broader conditions that we live in, to transform the conditions that created that inaccessibility in the first place. Access can be a tool to challenge ableism, able-bodied supremacy, independence, and exclusion. And I believe that we can do access in liberatory ways that aren't just about inclusion, diversity, and equality, but are rather in service of justice, liberation, and interdependence. So, I've been calling this liberatory access. And so for me, liberatory access gets us closer to the world that we want and ache for, rather than simply reinforcing the status quo. Rather than simply saying, oh, how do we get disabled people to be able to come and be part of our events or, our able-bodied world, right? We could use access in a different way to entirely shift those conditions as well. There is no liberatory access without access intimacy. And in fact, access intimacy is one of the main criteria for liberatory access. Liberatory access understands addressing inaccessibility and ableism as an opportunity for building deeper relationships with each other, realigning ourselves with our values and what matters most to us, and challenging oppression. Liberatory access calls upon us to create different values for accessibility than what we have historically had. So it demands that the responsibility for access, for example, shifts from being an individual responsibility to a collective responsibility. I know, what a concept. That access shifts from being silencing to being freeing, from being isolating to being connecting, from being hidden and invisible, as so much access work is, to being visible, from being understood as burdensome to valuable, from being considered a resentful obligation to an opportunity, from shameful to powerful, from rigid to creative. Most of the best liberatory access examples I know were extremely creative. They were people who didn't settle for just the status quo of, oh, well, this is how we always do things. But they were folks who came together and brainstormed and got creative. We could have it any way we want it. How do we want to build this? What do we want to do? So liberatory access is a way of doing access that transforms both our today and our tomorrow. So in this way, liberatory access helps us to not only resist against the world we don't want, but it also helps us to actively build the world that we do want. And liberatory access requires a political container to live in and orient from, and I believe that disability justice is that political container. Access should be happening in service of our larger goals of building interdependence and embracing need, because this is such a deep part of challenging ableism and the myth of independence. So the myth of independence is the idea that we can and should be able to do everything on our own. And of course, we know that's not true. Someone made the clothes that you're wearing now. Someone made your shoes, your car, or the mass transit system that you take. We don't grow all our own food and spices. We can't pretend that what happens in one country doesn't affect other countries, as we're so clearly seeing now, or that things like clean air and water don't bound us all together. We are dependent on each other. The myth of independence reflects such a deep level of privilege, especially in this rugged, individualistic, capitalist society, and produced the very idea that we could even mildly conceive of our lives or our accomplishments as solely our own. And of course, the other side of this, the other side of the myth of independence, it's not just that it's not true. So it's not just that the emperor has no clothes, but that everyone else should pretend he's fully clothed too. And we're seeing this in many different ways in our current administration. So the myth of independence is not just about the truth of being connected and interdependent on one another. It's also about the high value that gets placed on buying into the myth and believing that you are independent, and the high value placed on striving to be independent, right? So another cornerstone of the ableist culture that we live in. We should all be constantly striving to be more independent, to be more privileged, basically. Instead of challenging a privileged system, we just strive to be the people on top, right? Instead of asking why some people are consistently at the bottom. Interdependence moves us away from the myth of independence and towards relationships where we're all valued and have things to offer. It moves us away from knowing disability only through dependence, which paints disabled bodies as being a burden on others at the mercy of able-bodied people's benevolence, the benevolent oppressors. We become charity cases, a way for able-bodied people to feel better about themselves, and we internalize our sense of being a burden and sad and tragic. All of this sets up a dynamic where disabled people feel like we have to be liked in order to receive basic daily access to live, and where able-bodied people feel entitled to receive the recognition for providing access. This is not access intimacy, to be clear. And this dynamic of disabled people being dependent on able-bodied people shapes so many disabled people's lives and is the foundation upon which so much domination, control, violence, and abuse happens. Liberatory access is something that I work to practice in my life and my political work. Whenever we have events, I always think, how can we use this as an opportunity to build more access intimacy into our access work as well as our political work at large? I think of liberatory access and access intimacy as something that we can use to unhinge ableism. These are tools we can use in our work to confront ableism and all forms of oppression, because disabled people are not only disabled. Again, what a concept. We are people of color. We are all different genders and sexualities. We come from different class backgrounds and cultures. We are survivors, bystanders, and offenders. We are human, and we get to be complex and human, just like everybody else. In our campaigns and at our conferences or at our events, we can ask ourselves, how do we use this opportunity to practice parts of disability justice? How can we help grow access intimacy? Or what would liberatory access look like here? In the same way that we would work to try and practice racial or gender justice, again, in service of things such as justice, community building, trust, love, we can also work to practice disability justice too. So I want to read this quote from the essay, Feeling the Weight, Some Beginning Notes on Disability, Access, and Love that I wrote. It's also on my blog. Quote, "These are the parts of disability justice and liberation that keep me up at night, that have hurt more than any ableist remark, that have left more scars than any surgery. This is the underbelly of ableism. This is what I fear we will be left to wrestle with after every building is made accessible and every important policy is passed." Unquote. In all of my work for disability justice, I have always come back to the human parts of disability. The parts that we would rather not talk about, the parts that are not about the bills or the budgets or the laws or the services, the parts that live under our skin and inside of our bones and cells. The parts that are buried, the parts that most of us have had to learn how to navigate on our own, if we've learned to navigate them at all. I love being disabled. And my history of disability has been so drenched in trauma and sorrow, pity and isolation, silence and pain, shame and guilt, violence and abuse. I don't know how to talk about disability without talking about these parts, without pulling them out of their hiding places and holding them out to you and showing you and asking you, where are yours? I don't know how to be disabled without being all of who I am, a queer, disabled, Korean, transnational, and transracial adoptee, woman, survivor, from the Caribbean, non-mainland US, always searching for others who have had to learn how to live on the outskirts, who have had to learn how to survive off of longing and laughter. These identities and experiences are all part of each other, and asking me or anyone to separate them, it's not only oppressive, it's impossible. Access intimacy has transformed my life and transformed my present, even if I can't change my past. It is one of the ways that I practice disability justice in my everyday life, and one of the ways that I ask others to do the same. Ableist access has shaped so much of who I am and every relationship that I have ever had. When I think of all the oppressive forces in my life that demanded, often violently, that I shrink myself in order to survive, ableist access is easily one of the most prominent. Access intimacy means so much to me that it's hard to articulate. When I try and explain it to people with whom it exists, I never seem to do it justice. When I think about disability justice, I think about access intimacy because it has a direct effect on my daily life and it makes love possible. And in any of our work for liberation, isn't that what we should be working for? Anything that makes love more possible? Anything that makes joy, healing, and trust more possible? Anything that can take away the power and cruelty of oppression, violence, abuse, and trauma. Access intimacy makes love more possible in my life and in myself, and I will always be grateful for that. I'll never understand the magic of it or how it works exactly, only that it softens my heart and it lets me exhale. Only that it gives me hope, as terrifying as hope can be when your survival has always depended on fear and the lesser of two evils. Access intimacy has been a lighthouse in the storm of ableism, both beckoning me back home to love and reminding me that I never left. Thank you all very much. Thank you. How do you want to do the Q&A, Emily?
Somebody other than me should call him.
Okay.
I have this strange box that works as a microphone.
Oh, good. Are there any questions or comments? You don't have to have a question. You could just share your thoughts if you have thoughts. You do have thoughts, but yeah.
Hello. Are there terms, words, phrases that able-bodied people use where they're trying to be supportive but in fact are offensive? And if you can speak to what some of those may be for you.
I mean, for me in my life, lame and cripple have definitely been two that are constantly, or like gimpy. A lot of people used to call me that. But I feel like those are more, actually, people should know that those are more like generally offensive terms, but it doesn't seem like people do. I think now too within disability community, there's a lot of difference and diversity in terms of, there's facets of the disabled community that they would say, oh, don't use this word. But then there's other facets you'd be like, no, I feel really empowered by that word. So I think language is something that we're still grappling with and creating, which I love because we need so much more language than what we have. So I think about things like, there was a big push for differently abled, for example, to be used as the term that like refers to disabled people. And there's part of the disabled community who loves that term and feels really embraced and open and like seen or recognized by that term. But then there's part of disability community that is like, no, I'm disabled. Why would I say I'm not just differently like I don't just have, like a I don't know, like a hand that moves a different way, like I am disabled, like, and I get marked as such and then oppressed as such. And so it's important for me to name it. There's also a lot of stuff around like person first language, so person with a disability versus disabled person or disabled. I like saying disabled for me because I feel like I say I'm queer. I say I'm a person of color. I don't say I'm a person who is queer. So I like it. Plus, I also like that for me, disabled feels more accessible and like transferable in different situations that I'm in. And I'm oftentimes, because I have lots of different identities, but also because I do this work publicly now, I'm often with people who this is their first time even having a conversation about disability. And so it's the organizer in me is like, this is not the time to be like, you should say something, but like, how do we have exchanges, especially with like, I'm thinking about elders of color, for example, where I want to engage them around disability, and me sitting on my high horse is not the way to do that. It's never the way to do that. So I would say ask people, actually, is what I do across the board. I ask people how they would like to be referred to. And that's like in terms of pronouns and gender stuff. That's also in terms of disability stuff, because people will they get to choose to define themselves however they want to. So I hope that's a little helpful by basically saying, no, there's no answer.
People can introduce themselves before they...
Oh, yeah. Who are you?
I'm Eddie Ituarte from Oakland. I'm also a co-producer of a Pushing Limits radio program, and I think you've appeared on it.
I have.
Yeah. So you talk about excess intimacy, and that's the first time I've heard the term, but in my 70 or so years, I've certainly felt that kind of intimacy, both from other disabled people, and I was most familiar with it because of Chicano intimacy. Whenever some Chicanos or Latinos see each other in the street for the first time, something kind of clicks. So, yeah, so it happens in other communities, not just a disability community. Do you have, though, a term from the other side about instead of access disability, how about those instances? And you could tell right away that the folks are going to come up with you as something condescending, something insulting in their own ways. They mean to be helpful, but they're not. As I grow older and as my disability gets more pronounced, I'm finding that happening daily and more of this anti-access disability. So have you written about that or talked about that? Because for me, frankly, that's more of a prevalent experience than access disability.
Totally. Do you mean another word other than ableism?
Another word other than ableism?
Because I just call it ableism when it happens.
That's fine. No. There's different things we could call it.
Hostile ableism? I don't know.
Hostile, prejudiced, I guess. Ignorant.
Yeah.
It kind of depends. And there's a lot of dirty words too. You could also describe the offenders. And that's fun too. And actually, the whole thing, responding is actually, I don't know, the older you get and the more experienced you get dealing with this stuff, you could have some fun dealing with it. And once in a while, you might educate people.
Yeah.
My name is Rebecca, and I'm from the School of Nursing. And first of all, I just want to say thank you for the clarity. Just so much clarity and so much passion and so much information. I'm sort of vibrating from it, actually. And what I want to ask you is, there are some nursing students here, and as a nursing professor, I would really like if you could address specifically that intimacy access in the healthcare field.
Yes, that's a great question. So there's so many pieces to that question. Okay, so the first part is there's so many disabled people that I know who spend so much time in and out of hospitals or with medical care providers and have an access intimacy with their medical providers, which is amazing. There's also the kind of access, so that's like full access intimacy. There's also the piece of access intimacy that I find whenever I'm with any type of like practitioner or provider that deals with bodies, where we both seem to have a familiarity and a comfortableness of just talking about bodies as is, not just descriptively, without putting any like the way that if I go to get physical therapy, the way that my physical therapist will just talk about bodies, like just go right into it. Whereas like in our culture, in mainstream, we just dance around it a lot. And so there's that kind of access intimacy. But then there's also this other piece around how I think with nurses and a lot of other medical professionals, there's no access, like it kills the access intimacy because the medical industrial complex is so oppressive and can be. At the same time that we also rely on it for care, right? Again, these system capitalism, we rely on it to live, we hate it because it's killing us, you know. So when I think about, so your question is like how to talk about that specific access intimacy with nurses or how to build it? Both? Yeah, both, yeah. I did that to myself. So, I mean, I think one is that I actually have found that nurses I've been able to feel more access in my own life. I've had a lot of surgeries and in and out of hospitals and doctors, physical therapists, brace makers, all kinds of things. When I was younger, my entire childhood and young adult life. And I found actually that nurses have been some of the people that I've had more access intimacy with, more so than even doctors and things, you know? I mean, and often that's because you're spending more time with nurses. And I mean, in my opinion, I feel like nurses end up kind of having a better bedside manner in general than most doctors that I've come in contact with. So I feel like there are definitely ways that nurses can have that in the front of their mind as they're working with patients. And again, like the human part of it, because I know when I was a child and I had all these surgeries and all these doctor's visits and all this like, you know, making prosthetic braces and things, very few people ever asked me what I wanted or how I was doing, or does this feel okay? Do you want to have cold metal pressed against you right now? Should I warm it up for you? You know, like these small things, they really make a huge difference. Even asking somebody how they're doing before you start poking and prodding them, you know? And I think it was definitely a way that I learned that other people knew more about me than I did. You know, it was like a very intense form of medicalized ableism. I feel like is a really intense form of ableism because of the way that we understand doctors and medical providers, right? Like they're up here, you don't question them. They're, you know, akin to what? Like godly almost, you know, and they're going to save you, whatever. So I feel like even small things like that help. And also things like, you know, I think about the medical practitioners or providers that I've had who have really been life rafts and helped me find loopholes of how to like navigate and get through the medical industrial complex. So who have been like, oh, there's this great grant you could apply for to get a free wheelchair, or oh, you know, that like. So I think there's also a way that nurses can act as conduit and can help disabled folks and chronically ill folks, sick folks, as they're oftentimes being bombarded by the medical industrial complex or the medical world. So I feel like that, and then in terms of building it with each other and like supporting each other to cultivate that as nurses is also a huge piece of the work too, so that you're not in it alone. And that way, when you make mistakes, as we all make mistakes all the time, right? It's not about practice, not about perfection, it's about practice. to have those kind of conversations. Also because we will all probably become disabled and more disabled as we age. So let's start now in having these conversations, you know? So I hope that helps a little bit. I think that would be great. I have a post on my blog about the medical industrial complex, if anybody's interested in looking at it. And it speaks kind of to that complexity of like how that we're constantly in these systems and, you know, submerged in these systems as we're actively trying to change them as we rely on them for our survival. So like how does that work? So where's that orange box? Oh,
so
hi.
it's over here. So my name is Milton, and first of all, thank you. You crushed it. So very provocative. So there's a couple things that are going on in my head, but I think I'm going to try to land on one of them. And so this tension around sort of access as at the sea level, right? We're just going to let you in the door, right? And so it makes me think about this idea of privilege as an impoverishing condition. So we're thinking about flipping the script. I was meditating on this for a while, and I sort of got off track onto something else. But some of the things you said today really make me think about what would happen if we sort of inverted the conversation and talked about ableism or other forms of sort of power and privilege is actually impoverishing in the sense that it prevents people from accessing the deeper existential parts of their reality that they're oftentimes too frightened to explore. And I think that's oftentimes feeds the timidity around engaging or asking or making oneself vulnerable. So I just wonder what you think about that.
I think you are right on. I don't even think there's anything to add to that. I feel like that is what we're talking about, right? Because that to me is that kind of underbelly of access that's not just about like, oh, we just didn't get you the ramp, but it's like then what that means to people, you know, or oh, we didn't, you know, we forgot to send out the reminder not to wear scented products. It's like what that means then, not only like the physical logistical things of like, oh, that means that tomorrow I'll probably have to spend the day recovering from that, but then also like if you can't go, what the isolation or the exclusion or the secondary, understanding somebody as like a second-class citizen, you know, or just window dressing, I think as Eli Clare talks about, like just what that does to your psyche and how that impoverishes you as you're talking about that. And I mean, and also, I love that you use the word impoverished because the connection between ableism and capitalism is so incredibly deep. And it's no coincidence that most disabled people are poor and most poor people are disabled, right? And then that gets compounded by race, of course. Yeah. Thank you, Melvin. Oh, yes. Hi.
Hi, my name is Justin Tedford, and I'm a graduate student in English literature. And as I was sitting here listening to your talk, I couldn't help but pick out your reference to Audre Lorde.
Yeah.
And as I said, I'm in literature. So one of my biggest questions to you is, has literature helped you at all in your activism? And if so, how? And do you see literature able to help us connect what you're talking about with access into intimacy and disability and the non-disabled population?
Wow, there's a lot of questions. Thank you. Great questions. So one, how has literature impacted my activism? Or has it, and how? It has. And I mean, Audre Lorde also, I mean, she's somebody I grew up with, and her work has meant so much to me. And reading the cancer journals, for example, was one of the first texts I ever read by, and I don't know if Audre would have identified as disabled or not, but by, descriptively, a disabled woman of color, queer woman of color. Frida Kahlo's paintings were one of the first paintings I'd ever seen of a queer disabled woman of color as well. So definitely, art, literature, all of it has completely impacted my life because it, I feel like when I was able to read, when I was growing up, I didn't have disabled people around me. I didn't have politically disabled people around me, especially. I had there were some descriptively disabled people around me, but they were never people who were like, I am disabled and I am proud to be disabled, or I understand my disability and my identity as being connected to other disabled people, or I have an analysis around ableism. I didn't have any of that. And so literature and reading and any like kind of media was really a way that signified to me that there was like somebody else out there who was experiencing similar things and who was like doing political work around it. And so that definitely changed my life. When I think about how literature can play a part in access intimacy, so I have a story. So one is just a shout out to Octavia's Brood. I don't know if anybody here has heard of that anthology, but basically they talk about how all organizing is science fiction because we're imagining worlds that haven't been created yet. And so it's an anthology of science fiction writers and organizers who are writing science fiction. And I have a story in there called Hollow. And I feel like that is another example of how writing and literature has helped me, even just in writing that story, has helped me to like flex my visioning skills to imagine worlds that haven't existed yet, and to think in Hollow, for example, my story, like what would a world that was completely run by and for disabled people look like? What would it be like? What would those disabled people in it be like? And so that's been really exciting. And I think that there's lots of ways that literature definitely sparks activism. I mean, I think about even just beyond disability, like reading Octavia Butler, reading, so many different amazing authors that have impacted me. And then I think in terms of access intimacy, I do think that it can help to build it because those kinds of pieces of literature can help to, I hope, build empathy and compassion and a compelling, instinct to compel able-bodied people to like, that this is something important, that disabled people are whole and complex beings, that we're not just like these annoying people that constantly ask for access. So I think it could play a big role in it. And I know that writing has saved my life. I mean, I started my blog writing because nobody else was doing it. And I before that, I was just waiting for somebody else because I thought surely there are other people out there doing this work. And I kept like trying to search for it. And then I just said, fuck it. Can I curse here? Sorry. I just said, whatever. I will just start writing. And that's really how I found other queer disabled people of color, was through my blog and through writing, and how people then found me. So absolutely. Yes. And I love that you're in literature too.
Thank you, Mia. We have a few more questions, but I'm going to encourage you to ask your questions at the reception.
Okay.
Kathy has a few closing remarks, but let's give one more round of applause for Mia. Thank you.
Thank you so much. No, you can stay here. Thank you so much. This is fabulous. I want to just acknowledge so much of what Mia said in the talk and so much of what we're doing at Longmore, and to announce the next year, the Longmore Lecturer will be, drum roll, we have an announcement. Is she here? No. Then I won't tell you. No. It's Alice Wong.
Oh,
yeah. And for those of you that don't know her, she is instrumental in the Disability Visibility Project that will get all these amazing stories of, disabled people doing good in the world and, good like access work and expanding, how we think about activism and ableism and all those things that Mia talked about to us today. The second thing is I want to just kind of acknowledge that the Longmore Institute needs your support. We survive thanks to donations from people in the room. And so I really, really, really encourage you, if you haven't supported us yet, to please do so. We have envelopes in the back. Emily's got them on the table there. There she is. And no donation is too small. No donation is too big. But anyway, it would really, really be a huge help to us. Those of you that have supported us in an ongoing way, and there's many of you here that have done so, thank you so, so much. It's huge. Every single bit counts, and we really rely on you. The third thing I want to say is there's a great reception at the back in the room, and we invite everybody to join us. And I have a special request of every single person in this room when they go to the reception, and that is to seek out somebody that you've never met before and talk to them. Because I think, as your stories have made clear, that it's exactly those kinds of conversation that are going to push our boundaries and push us to think differently. And these people that you've never met probably have a story that you really need to hear. So seek somebody out. Everybody's welcome. I'm so glad you came, and enjoy. And thank you again, everybody, and especially Mia. Thank you.